Hello, Dragon Slayers. Good morning. We are honored today again to have my good friend and my cousin, sharing bloodlines, Michael Dallin. If you like this podcast, consider the purchase of either Rainbow Covenant or Dragon Slaying. Uh, I can't speak to Dragon Slaying. You can read the reviews yourself. It would be self-serving. But as an independent reviewer of Rainbow Covenant, it is an outstanding book and one of the most impressive books I have read about the Old Testament. And Michael, I'm honored to call you cousin. One of the things I was going to ask you about is how this really speaks to an old tradition of how, with time, as people age, at least in the Jewish tradition, they became biblical scholars, not unlike yourself. And I get a sense that, in fact, I think you know more about my family history than I do, that your great grandfather and my grandfather was a very pious man who spent the latter years of his life on the study of Torah and the Old Testament and lived that way. The question I had is, as a psychiatrist, and one of the reasons that I wrote my book was to help people who were despairing. And I think there's a correlation between the drift away from traditional religious values and the sense of ennui and despair in our society. If you follow the path, I think you're closer to God. You're almost protected by the guardrails of the covenant if you live by the covenant. Want to comment on that?
Well, I turned to Torah as a young man. I became convinced that it was true, that it was the revolutionary way. We were all very into the idea of revolution when my college years in the late 60s, early 70s. And I saw that it was actually, I mentioned before, it was a Viennese Catholic psychiatrist named Wilfred Daim who laid out the Exodus story, realizing that there are legendary and mythic bits in it, but that it is the story of the greatest revolution in human history, a prototype for all revolutions. With common factors of all revolutions, including fighting, the left wing revisionists and the right wing revisionists, the Trotskyites on the one hand and the white Russians on the other, and and looking out for the Stalins along the way. Um, the comparisons between whoops not only is it a great revolution, but I came to the belief that it's true that established to be the Jews were established to be this revolutionary people who would bring people to the truth that the world is not an accident, that um, reality didn't come into being because of some random fluctuation in a quantum field, but that it was intended, um, and um, and that there is a moral code there that is within the body of what we call the Old Testament that is a revolutionary program for all mankind, for all human society, for men and women, um, and that it has been working, and it's had an effect on the world. That it is not a closed book, but rather a proceeding, a revolution that is a continuing revolution into our time and will go beyond. Um, there's a reason that Israel is in the news. Well, he works for First Covenant Foundation. His checks come from our foundation.
Oh, how cool! What does he do in addition to tech support?
Paint, shovel snow,
Okay.
scrape rust, carpentry, plumbing.
Well, back to your comment about how revolutionary the Jewish people were at that time. I think it's important to point out that it wasn't just anarchy. It was a revolution that was structured by the covenant and by the Ten Commandments. Those were the boundaries. Those were the guardrails.
Well, and even beyond that, there is the universal covenant that precedes the Ten Commandments. Uh, my work has been to explicate the first covenant, or the covenant between Adam and deity, and then later Noah and all his children, which is a universal covenant, which has elements in common with the Ten Commandments, but that precedes it. And if you're looking for universal moral laws, there are the universal moral laws. The Ten Commandment system, which involves 613 listed black letter Torah commandments in the 5 books of Moses, is a priestly code of law. It is for a people of priests. The Jews are supposed to be a kingdom of priests and a holy people. And we have laws that are designed to keep us holy, including separate laws for the priests among the Jews, the Kohanim and the Levites, another tribe. We are Yisrael. We're the common Jews,
The peasants.
uh, but it's still pretty good, but Israel is Israel. But all mankind has this code, and it is something which is binding on the Jews too. I mean, we too are obligated to these things. One thing about the universal law, it does give us insight into the nature of our laws, like into the laws of kosher food, and you see what they're all about. When you have the two laws together, it's like a stereopticon. You get to see things with two perspectives, and it's better than one. The universal law is the way for non-Jews to get into Judaism, while it's a way for Jews to get into what the reason for many of our priestly laws, and you see how they're priestly laws. Um, Non-Jews are not obligated to avoid meat and milk in their diet, eating them together, or they're not obligated to avoid pork or mouse or armadillo, or carrion, while Jews are. But it'd be a good thing sometimes to do those things. You learn from the universal law, from the study of it. Um, some of the things that made the Egyptians such a deplorable people, a cruel people, and some of the things that made other enemies of the Jews so awful. Um, they would occasionally eat like monsters, and they would eat living creatures alive. Yeah. Oh, horrible things.
You're speaking of the ancient Egyptians, not contemporary culture.
Well, yeah, except people today will also continue eating creatures alive because they really are monstrous. You've heard the stories of the people, taking live monkeys and eating them like Hannibal the cannibal. You don't want to think about it too much, but it's kind of a mix. It's a ritualistic, semi-sexual kind of thing that gets them going, but it's appalling and cruel, and you're literally eating like a monster. And the universal law is to prohibit that. The universal law are involves 7 laws that the nations, the goyim, the Gentiles, and all humanity are obligated to, in one way or another, turn into law, effective, practical law that is enforceable through courts and police and prisons and the criminal justice system.
Do you see that as a common theme among all great religions?
No, no, the others are. I mean, other religions are. I mean, Christianity is famously antinomian. They, if you believe and love the Christian God, the dead Jewish teacher, that excuses everything ultimately. There's a lot of theological quibbling about all of that. Let me say, in order to become a student of these universal laws, it helps a lot to study the Gentile religions and to see the differences between the religions and with Judaism, with the Torah teachings.
So you're referring to the conviction that among Christians that Jesus redeems us without regard to how we live our lives.
And sins. Yeah. Well, Christianity treats the law of Sinai, including the universal laws, as the burden of the law. They confuse the ritualistic laws with the very serious criminal laws, and you can't do that. It's true that the ritualistic laws do not apply to non-Jews. Um, I mean, they don't have any bearing. The laws of the Kohanim or the Levites don't have any bearing on Christian life, um, or the laws of temple worship don't have any bearing. But they still should um, read some of this with attention, and they certainly should not just toss away the teachings that they, like everybody, are obligated to establish a system of courts and police to make sure that people don't commit atrocities, monstrous atrocities. The seven laws all relate to things that everybody with half a brain ought to know are unholy. They all involve horrible oppression of your fellow man. They all involve things like raping people, male or female, stealing, taking things against people's will, murder, uh, and the law involving the law against anarchy, that all men are obligated to help establish, defend, and protect a system of courts and police to make sure that anarchy is oppression. Anarchy means the rule of might over right, and and you see this fleshed out in the the stories in Genesis and all the way up to the revelation at Sinai. I'm going beyond the scope of your question, but allow me to point out um, that the Old Testament is for the world up to the revelation at Sinai, up to and including the Ten Commandments. But after that, it's the laws, the ritual laws, the there are a lot of narrow legalistic statutes. Those are not for all the world. Psalms in the Old Testament are for all the world. The histories are for all the world. Um, Most of the five books of Moses are a private conversation between the people of Israel and and deity, and it's not for everybody to just jump into. Um, but the whole world is able to get a lot and should get a lot out of the stories that most people really know. I mean, almost the whole world, a good portion of the world, even in places like Cambodia or China, they've heard echoes at least of the story of Samson, of Babel, of Adam and Eve, and Noah. um, of the struggles of Israel with Egypt. And those are the things, I mean, that is some demonstration of God's providence, that those are the things that almost the whole world has plugged into and is familiar with.
There, as you see uh, Judaism carries with it a moral and ethical rigor that one lives within. When you, one of the things I have difficulty wrapping my head around, since I lived for a while in an Islamic culture that seemed to be hospitable. Indeed, when I was in Niger, the Nigerian army was trained by the Israeli army. And I became close with some of the Israeli army because I took care of them. I was their doctor, for which I would be paid in lots of matzah.
Matzah, oh great,
But yeah,
like a punishment.
that was the currency, right? Anyway, I
Matzah.
but that has been transformed since I left Niger. The jihadists has taken over, and I be unlikely if I could return without risking decapitation. So, how do you factor in what's become of Islam and what is Islam? And because parts of Islam seem to have the same level of moral and ethical rigor as Judaism.
Well, they've gone crazy. They are full of hate for Israel. You know,
But that isn't all of Islam, is it?
it's spreading. Um, I think we're losing Turkey now, and we're losing Indonesia. Um, but no, I mean there are wonderful Muslims all over who are appalled by this horrible turn towards jihadism and to Jew hate, um, and as well they should be. But you know, one of the predictions in Genesis that the whole world is supposed to pay attention to. The Old Testament is loaded with prophecy, and one of the prophecies is that those who bless Israel are blessed, and those who curse Israel are cursed. So these people have started they have been cursing themselves, and it's ruinous for their morality.
Well, look what happened to Joe Biden. He lost the election.
The here in Detroit is the epicenter in America of Jewish presence. And I remember I'm a lawyer. I was representing a Christian church, a talking in tongues Pentecostal church in Dearborn, Michigan. And they were my clients were just convinced that the city of Dearborn was against Christianity. You know, this is many years ago, and and I thought it was just ridiculous. But 20 years hence, there really is, they have a Muslim dominated government, and a lot of the people really are just full of Jew hate for Israel. And this does not make them better people. It makes them dangerous. Um, we talk about the universal moral code. Actually, I know it sounds very parochial, but part of the universal moral code is this aspect of those who bless Israel are blessed, and those who curse Israel, the Jews, the the system that was set up anciently to try to incarnate the the precepts of God's law in a people. Um, it is uh, it carries over to the world. If the world is agreeable to this system, is entitled to blessing. Uh, if it rejects it, if it turns against Israel, if it joins the Nazis or the jihadists and the enemies of the Jews, they bring cursing upon themselves. And you see how they do that they become antinomian, they become anti-law, they don't keep the precepts that they ought, and it's bad for them and bad for the world. But right now, we're fighting about the fate of the Palestinians, um, and like the Arab world is this vastly underpopulated mess of degenerate governments, um, that has more than 600 times the territory of Israel. They have plenty of room and plenty of use for several million people who could be resettled and who could redeem the land. The land needs redemption. The land has been ruined by paganism and horrible actually ancient Roman um, uh, atrocities over many centuries. Um, and
If you could be more specific, Michael, how did that occur?
every Roman town of any size over more than 4 centuries had something called the games. And the games involved not just fights between gladiators, but they would bring in these beautiful animals, uh, all the apex predators, the lions, the tigers, the bears, um, the baboons, to to fight with each other and to fight human beings, and they would kill them. And oh, you're wincing, and it was appalling. It makes a football game look highly like a tea party, um, and they would kill them, and they just vacuumed up the animals of North Africa and of Western Asia over once a week. Everybody had to have their games. Uh, every town over 400 years, and after that we had the Sahara Desert that spread like crazy because the Romans just screwed up the ecology of these areas by taking the predators. I was in excuse me, I was in North Africa and Western Asia, Jordan, and the Saudi Peninsula not long ago, about a year ago, and you fly over it and you see the horrible devastation. The land intrinsically could be as green as Israel, but it isn't. You just have some scrub at the bottom of some valleys. There's water there, but uh, the animals have been reduced, um, and the Arab um, uh, agricultural practices are savage. You saw some of this in the Sahel in Niger,
Well, I did. I think one of the critical issues was the overgrazing
right?
of land, which
Right.
allowed the desert to expand.
Well, Islam has been very hard on the world. These different Gentile religions have an approach to the world that does not cherish the world. Islam and Christianity too both teach that the world is a husk that human beings need to um, uh, exit from instead of a home for the race, for the human race. Um, so they aren't terribly sensitive to these things. And the other cultures and religions are often neglectful of the duty of husbandry to the land. The Torah teaches that man was given dominion over the planet, and that it's our responsibility to keep it up, to make it work for ourselves and for future generations. That ethos is absent from um, most religions, and and as is the ethos that the seven commandments teach so strongly, that animals have feelings, and that the king of the universe himself cares about the feelings of animals. Um, and so you see people of other religions I'm not saying the Jews are perfect at all, but we do have an ethos that insists that people treat animals kindly. It's basic Torah, for instance, that a pet owner, an animal owner, should feed his or her animals before eating himself. Um, and that ethos is just not there in other traditions. If they
Dietary laws, the kosher tradition speaks to the compassionate sacrifice of an animal rather than just, yeah, cruelly.
Well, a people of priests are obligated to take their meat. You're meat eaters. If you're going to eat meat, you need to take it as painlessly as you can. Anything less than that is animalistic and not Jewish. Other people, Gentiles, are not held up by Torah to that standard, but they are entitled to learn and to take up those laws that make sense to them, and they should.
I commented yesterday in a podcast with one of my other colleagues that we were talking about Judaism, and the question was, what is Reform Judaism? And I said, Reform Jews are Jews that eat pork. It was rather glib, but eat bacon in particular. But
Okay, there's a operative definition.
well, I can recall my own parents. My dad didn't stray that far from the tradition.
No, he wouldn't. No, his would not.
One of his favorite Sunday meals was bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches. It was.
Oh, I loved them too. Yeah, I went that route too. I love to be able to, but now we have ersatz bacon.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's yeah.
Well, one of the problems with a pig is you just can't butcher a pig, slaughter a pig in a kindly way. The pig is a very bright animal. It's like eating dog, God forbid. Uh, dogs, pigs, they smell blood, they smell death, the smell of death. It freaks them out. And the only way to mercifully butcher or slaughter a pig is by coming up behind it, and sneaking up on it. And it's just impossible to do that in an industrial, for industrial meat production. Uh, so they suffer. They experience terrible fright, pain, and a people of priests is not supposed to get our meat like that. Um, if there is even a slight, I was reading Temple Grandin, the autistic um, animal expert, the designer um, of slaughter facilities for domestic animals, and she had a wonderful book, Thinking in Pictures, about designing for cows. She could visualize what a cow could see through her autism, and she says, a kosher slaughter should be absolutely painless, and the animal should not feel fear. Cows, for instance, are herding animals. They don't mind being herded and being pushed together. They're kind of cool with that. Um, but the way the kosher slaughter works is they should have no fear, no pain. If there is even a slight imperfection in the slaughtering knife or sword, it's not kosher because it would catch. Um, Kosher slaughter involves one slice of the carotid and an instant loss of blood pressure, complete unconsciousness, and the animals bleed out, and that's it.
It's unclear to me who wrote the screenplay for Soylent Green, but I suspect there may have been Jewish energy behind it,
Good bet.
uh, because the way in that film that Jews were, I'm sorry, that people were transformed into meat was in a very humane death.
Oh yeah, yeah, merciful death, but not kosher, Tommy. You know, so that's a problem.
So another comment I'd like you to make, if you could, is do you see a correlation between the rigor with which one practiced Judaism and their attitudes toward Zionism as well as their attitude toward, how will I say it, indulging some of the radicalism in this country? That is, are Reform Jews more likely to tolerate the kind of abuses than are Orthodox Jews?
Well, I was just talking to a good friend we met in Israel. He's a very successful, was a career dentist and a good one, and now he invests in real estate. And I was telling him that we have just begun the month of Adar. It coincides this year with the advent of Ramadan, Ramadan Mubarak. Um, and and he is not a religious guy, and he was saying, I don't really care about Ramadan, or I don't really care about Adar. And I was saying, well, you should. I mean, when Muslims have Ramadan, you have nothing if you don't care about the new month. And also, it's a time, incidentally, where we increase joy. It's um, it's the beginning of the season of spring in the northern hemisphere, where most of humanity lives, and it is a good time. And it precedes Purim, the holiday of Purim, and then the festival of Passover, and these are good things. Um, and he follows, and he's a Trumper, and he follows along with, and he hates Bibi Netanyahu. Um, while I appreciate Bibi Netanyahu, and I find Trump absolutely appalling and a threat to Western civilization. Um, I've noticed that people are all over the map on these things. You never know what you're going to get. Um, I'd like to say that all Orthodox Jews hate Trump and believe in Jewish dominion in the land of Israel, but that would be ridiculous. Um, we're nothing without truth. The Torah teaches that God is truth. He is the God of truth, and that if something is true, it's not of God. Um, so it's very important for us to hew to whatever is true and to face the facts head on. Um, is there a correlation between human decency and Torah observance? Not necessarily. I mean, you get people doing horrible things, but we do. But there is a tendency, because there is this a moral code in Judaism that can't be evaded. It's there, even if you don't keep it. It's there.
As a historian, uh, when I look at the founding of this country, uh, you and I'm surprised to see that you were aware of that. You and I should, well, no, I'm
You read my book.
not actually, I'm never surprised to see those things you're aware of. But I caught in the opening chapters of your book the argument that our founding fathers were heavily influenced by the Bible,
They sure were.
and that became the anchor of our Constitution. And I believe that. I believe that we were blessed as a country that at the time, the best and the brightest got together and designed this engine that was intended to be eternal in terms of its guideposts for this culture, for our country. And I appreciate that we have strayed many times away from that vision. But as we get closer to that organizing myth, I see us becoming more successful as a nation, and a nation that can heal, uh, God willing. So you had mentioned that they were, in particular, students of the first 5 books of the Bible.
Well, even before that, in the Glorious Revolution in England under Cromwell, you had these British prelates who had just received the a translated version from Tyndall, William Tyndall, of Deuteronomy, and they hadn't been aware of this, and they couldn't read it. You know, it was in Hebrew, um, and Tyndall made it available, and they went to work with a will to reform the laws of England, to take away the ghastly medieval uh, statutes that they had involving horrible punishments, unbelievable punishments, and trial by ordeal, and the like. And in the reaction to the Glorious Revolution, where they dug up Cromwell and and they did horrible things to his men. Good Time Charlie got rid of that, but those laws came back, and these bishops that they tortured to death for bringing in a new code of laws based on Deuteronomy fundamentally changed English jurisprudence, and our founding fathers knew of it, um, and um, they wanted the laws of Deuteronomy protecting the rights of the accused, the rights of debtors versus creditors, or American jurisprudence. I remember that Ben Franklin himself wanted, as the Great Seal of the United States, Moses crossing the Red Sea. They were very self-conscious of um, the revolutionary roots uh, of the Torah, and felt, the idea of the new order of the ages, which is still on the Great Seal of the United States, is based on the idea of this is a continuation of the revolution at Sinai.
How much do you believe that this really is a key to the Enlightenment? My conviction is that the Enlightenment would not have occurred without Martin Luther. That Luther, as I read him, was more closely attuned to the Old Testament and looked at that at the perspective of the excesses of Catholicism, and was a liberating force in terms of the religious dialogue at that time.
Yes, he was initially, but then he decided, um, he talked about, well, of course the Jews aren't interested in our religion. Look at the stupid things that we try to make them do. Um, and he tried to lighten up on the stupid things, but the Jews still didn't want to join his Christianity, so he cursed us upside down and sideways, and regarded us as anathema. Um, and he was a very weird character with his bowel problems, his horrible digestion, and his cursing the peasants, calling on the army to go and excoriate the peasants.
But I think what's part about Luther, from my perspective, is regardless of the quality of life as a Lutheran, it gave Christians in Europe a chance to see that there was no dogma that was not without challenge, and then led, I think, to the kind of thinking that resulted in the Enlightenment. People were prepared to think differently about things.
Well, they became Bible readers. The Catholic Church had barred Bible reading to the people. Only a select groups of priests could actually have access to a Bible. And the next thing Luther is going and translating it. He's working, from Tyndall's and the other the translations of the Hebrew, and bringing it to the masses, and establishing, his German as the language of all the Germanic tribes. Um, but yeah, I mean, the Bible is transformative, and it certainly, changed things utterly. But the founding fathers, when it came to the Jews, were not necessarily um, like, well, the founding fathers were sui generis. They were these brilliant, educated, cultivated men, and they usually did have good relations with the Jews that they, encountered, the few that they would encounter in life. But the Pilgrim Fathers and the Protestants, the founders of America, um, became Bible readers and felt a great affinity to Israel. They even felt that they were the new Israel, but their regard for Jews was slim to none generally, because they regarded us as that we had missed the boat, that we hadn't come to accept their God, that we were, um, a stubborn, rejectionist, fossil people. Um, and in when you were a young man, we had a leading um, scholar, Arnold Toynbee, who wrote these popular works. The Time magazine people just thought he was the cat's meow. And I remember that rotten bastard going on about the Jews are a fossil people because, we missed the boat because we hadn't plugged into the wonder of the dead Jewish teacher, Jesus as our savior. It was the damnedest thing, but that attitude was very, very common, and it was part of the colonial background too. Um, Hard on the Jews. They didn't appreciate that the people of Israel are in every generation a revolutionary people.
You comment on page 13 of the Rainbow Covenant uh, about the disproportionate numbers of Nobel laureates that are Jewish.
Beyond all comparison, it's just ridiculous. I remember not Chris Hitchens, Dawkins, the great atheist, was introduced to those statistics. I don't know if I had anything to do with that, but he saw those statistics, and the great atheist was shocked and was remarking, "That's an amazing data point. I've got to digest this. I've got to study this." And because it should affect an atheist thinking, like, what is it? I mean, is this the hand of God, or is this just a random fluctuation in a quantum field kind of accident?
Well, to summarize his point, which is again on page 13, among all of us in the world, we have a 1/1000th possibility of, that is 0.001 per, oh, I'm sorry, my decimals are wrong. 0.001 chance per million to win the Nobel Prize for any ordinary mortal. So that's what? 1 in a billion. Okay. Jews, on the other hand, have 3.69 chances per million to win the Nobel Prize.
Per million.
Yeah, per million.
Per million.
Yeah, 3.69 per million.
Well, there aren't that many Jews. I mean, that's a lot of it.
Those are pretty good odds.
Those are way better odds.
Why?
Well, because we have this, I mean, among other things, we have this wonderful moral code. Um, and even when we pull away, that moral code is still there. I was in Philadelphia, and I was talking to this physician, and I was telling him about my habit and joy of reading the New York Times obits. And I go through the New York Times obits, particularly to see people with names like McElhenney and or George, or these very Gentile names, and it turns out that they're actually Jews, and they didn't make a fuss about Judaism in their lives, but their mothers were Jewish, or they converted at some point, and uh, and they made it into the New York Times obits, which only very accomplished people do. And and he said, "Why don't you write a book about it?" And I was saying, "You don't get it. It's like a fire hose. It's just constant. It's every day, every week that you get these things that most of the world will not appreciate, that these folks are in fact Jewish people because their names are, you know, uh, uh, McGillicuddy or something." Um, and he asked, good question, what happens to their children, when the children are not Jews? And it's a fact. You just don't get that kind of accomplishment generally. You get a few. And I met your wonderful son Seth, and he is, but he subscribes to Judaism. I mean, he calls himself a Jewish man. But when they do join the Gentiles, when they go out into the Gentile world, that you don't see that level of accomplishment. Uh, Occasionally you do with a Blumenthal, the former Secretary of the Air Force, one of Jimmy Carter's cabinet members, uh, but mostly not. Um, while Jews from the rag picker's son, like Kirk Douglas, um, they're quite accomplished.
We are the great grandson.
I mean, you have the same blood. The blood is the same, but the culture is different.
Yeah, we're the great grandsons and grandsons of a rag picker that rose to triumph. Uh, as for Seth, he has always been a scholar, and as was his sister Rachel. And I think one of the formative influences in their lives is when they were growing up. Both his mother, Christine, and I were students. Christine was studying for her PhD, and I was trying to write articles that would be of national merit, even though I had no formal affiliation other than an adjunct appointment to a university. And so he was witnessing me writing, witnessing Christine studying, and both kids are absolutely brilliant and great students. And, you know, as are their own kids. So it's part of the tradition. I think there's something also about having an initiation ritual that includes a bar mitzvah and a bat mitzvah that compels the child to learn something of Hebrew, to read in Hebrew, and to deliver a speech at age 13 in Hebrew. That's an important ritual.
It's something, I suppose, but I think a lot of it is this feeling that the world depends on you, um, and the future of the Jewish people depends on what you yourself do.
But there is a strong sense of mission. You need to leave a contribution. In fact, right, I call it the heroic imperative. That
Good line.
yeah, you don't really have a choice. Do you get up in the morning or do you stay in bed? Do you confront challenges or do you shrink from them? And there's always a sense that you got to meet the challenge, you got to measure up. And it's not like a negative force, it's a force that says, I can do this. I've done it before. I can do it again. I can take what may seem difficult and I can do difficult.
Well, you do see this record in the descendants of the New York Times figures. Um, the the rag picker. I mean, Michael Douglas, the son of Kirk, is has his own record of accomplishment. But like I say, the Jews coming up and doing these things, whether they um, renounce their Judaism or abandon it or not, it's like a fire hose daily, um, and you don't get that kind of thing from uh, their descendants, um, and it's cultural. I love your line, the heroic imperative. That's yeah. So that's part of it, but ultimately this stuff comes down to a, a moral code, and the moral code should include the desire to earn God's blessing, earn the blessing of the Father of all things by your conduct, not by who you are, but by what you do. And um, and blessing Israel is part of the solution. It's not part of the universal moral code, but it's to do it is to win blessing, and to not do it is to merit cursing. So um, it's the acceptance of a Weltanschauung, of a worldview that tries to tries to um, conform and advance the agenda that the Old Testament is there to establish. Um, the reign, God's reign on earth. I mean, I've got a new article coming out. I have a newsletter that comes out periodically, um, and it goes on about the realized prophecies in the Bible and the Old Testament, and again from thousand.
So, those of you out there who want the newsletter is available at the Rainbow Covenant Foundation, correct?
First Covenant Foundation. I think it's First Covenant on Facebook. Um, but you should be able to find us. Go look for the book. Um, but remember, the Rainbow Covenant with Noah is also the first covenant with Adam and Noah. And before the later covenant, the Sinai covenant, you got to balance you juggle all these different covenants, but it's the first covenant too. I told you what happened. Uh, it was your niece actually who congratulated me on the coming out with the Rainbow Covenant, and she hadn't read it or anything, but
Who are you referring to? Which niece?
she was so pleased that I had the courage to come out as gay, with the Rainbow Covenant, and which I'm not, but but she just thought that was the cat's meow, because what a brave man, to do that. But
Are you referring to Cindy?
no, her sister. When no, it was Cindy.
Yeah, Cindy, right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I thought that was pretty funny, but that is. So I changed the name of the foundation from the Rainbow Covenant Foundation to the First Covenant Foundation, on the theory of, to hell with this. They're going to think I'm gay over this. That's not truth.
So they co-opted your title.
That she kind of made it clear that I would have to change it. Now I miss it because Rainbow Covenant is a very cool name, and that's what it is. It's a covenant, Genesis 9 with Noah, um, but um, it carries with it this mandate to um, not to reject this phenomenon of the Torah, the Jewish people, the mission of Israel, but to accept it and to try to forward it. Um, and and in our secular age, it's not it's not easy. It sounds like you're going to have to accept a lot of crazy stuff, like oh yeah, I don't believe in the basic rules of biology. You know, Darwin was wrong. The fossil record is just a bunch of old bones, and a friend of mine, a rabbi, teaches that. And it's just nuts, obviously. Um, but you have to go in with kind of a bloody mind, and as the British say, with um, with rigor and honesty, to see what's there and to discover for yourself if um, that there is truth there, and it's up to you to try to wiggle it out from all the barnacles of that have accreted over the ages.
Well, Michael, I speak for our listeners. I very much appreciate your wisdom, your inspiration. Uh, you are a person that passionately pursues his path, and you yourself are a hero in my own mind. Uh, I look forward to further.
I've loved your book so far. I must say, I mean, if we're going to do this, mutual admiration thing, I was saying that everybody ought to have a book like this, so you know your cousin, and it came away like just like, wow, Tommy, that's really something. I didn't, I knew your brother, my dentist, my friend, you know, but it's been a great pleasure reading it.
Well, I think it's a product of my own diaspora, having left Detroit, that we never really connected until recent times. But I am honored and delighted and cherish our friendship now and look forward to further dialogue. Uh, and I just hope that whatever genes motivated you are running in my bloodstream as well.
We have a very, very strong culture. That what we came from is uh, Lithuanian Jewry, um, was really something. And then recently, I saw something about my grandfather Dallin, who grew up in Kharkiv, which is the area being fought over between Ukraine and Russia now. And he went to a Zionist school where he learned industrial arts, and he really came out multilingual and made things of themselves. Our culture is really tremendous and unique on earth. I'm going to put in a plug for one of my favorite activities, which is estate sales. And Fridays, usually, I try to go to estate sales, and you go to these different houses, and where there's a lot of stuff, and I become friends with all these estate sale people. And when you go to the Jewish houses, you see there's a big difference between them and even Gentile academics generally. The culture, the thickness of the culture, and the richness is something that the estate sale people know about it. Oh, we've got a Jewish house. They get all excited.
So I would hope that we can hold that to our next dialogue because
Looking forward to it.
yeah, because I'm sure there's going to be something rich. But I have a quick question. What, since I am so concerned about the books and other things I have about this house, I prefer not to die until I clean it out. Uh, but what do you do with all the things that you purchase?
Well, I've got books stacked up that I'm dying to read, and they're all over. Do you remember our cousin Harold?
Of course,
Harold's, of course. I mean, what a character!
because Harold, for those who are not informed, Harold was the director of the Fair Gallery, wasn't he not?
Right. One of the Smithsonian museums.
Which is the yeah, yeah, it was an Asian art and a brilliant man. And his brother Aaron was a pioneer in cardiac catheterization in kids.
Both wonderful guys. Aaron was quite like an uncle, and we used to count on Harold to come by and fix our drapery cords because he was so good at it, you know. But Harold was something else. I remember visiting his apartment while Kennedy was president.
Oh, I visited the same apartment. Yes, right.
Have you visited? It was the most wonderful thing. It made the Smithsonian look kind of meager, you know. We had visited Gettysburg, the battlefield. I loved that, and the Smithsonian was pretty cool, but it wasn't like Harold's apartment. So my place has gotten to be, except the foundation now owns a couple of, another couple of houses, so I have more place to put stuff. But I've got books piled up the way Harold did. These wonderful books that um, and the art and these wonderful things that really make me happy. And so it's nice to live in a place where you are greeted constantly by things that you really like. So that's I'm going to be going to China and Japan and Tibet around in a little bit,
When are you departing?
few months, and I'm going to see what else I can get.
When are you leaving? When's your trip?
Uh, be after or the middle of Passover, really,
Oh, okay.
for about more than 3 weeks to Tibet and Nepal and Bhutan and Korea and Thailand, and it's going to be a pretty good trip. That we've got planned. I'm going with a buddy, a Catholic American guy who has wealth, and he's been buying up church confessionals and stained glass windows and all this stuff for another house that he bought. And we're going to be charging through the world together, seeing what.
So, are you traveling with a particular group, or you secure the itinerary yourself?
Yeah, it's Road Scholar. Used to be called Elder Hostel.
That's ROAD scholar, right?
ROAD. Yeah, they took us to Stonehenge and the Taj Mahal and Angkor Wat about a year ago, and it had us flying over the devastation of the Arab world, Petra, and places like that.
So, I hope to catch you before you depart, and most certainly
I hope so.
after your journey. I'm sure it'll be a yeah, very rich interview.
Uh, Ask me what I find, what we're dragging back.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time, and uh, I look forward to further dialogue. Be well, my friend.
Me too. Thank you, and you.